Hello, good people. Hello. Welcome back to another car conversation. Let's talk about some headlines. What happened this past week? I want to start off with Texas and Ken Paxton. So apparently, Ken Paxton felt Ken Paxton, Greg Abbott, and MAGA minions in Texas feel compelled to exercise their version of voter suppression and voter intimidation on elderly people in the state of Texas. What am I talking about? So, one of the oldest and longest volunteers and activists with LULAC this week, in case you missed it, her home was raided by Ken Paxton and his cronies, alleging that she was illegally registering people, specifically Latino people, to vote. They woke this 87-year-old woman out of her sleep, had her go outside, forced her outside of her home to stand in her front yard in her nightgown in front of about, I think it's around 8 to 9 police officers for about 3 hours while they searched her home, confiscated computer, phone, etc., and questioned her outside, standing in her nightgown in front of her neighbors and around these strange men. This is what they're doing in Texas. There's also a young woman, Cecilia Castellano, who she's also running. She's running for office in Texas. Same thing happened to her. So this is clear voter intimidation. And what they're hoping is that by intimidating these activists that are a part of and members of LULAC, that it will impose a threat to other members of the Latin community and keep those people from voting. And I also want to tell you this. From January of 2020 to September of 2022, this is when Ken Paxton developed this department, this new area that was going to look into illegal voting, right? Okay, so from January 2020 to September of 2022, Ken Paxton, this office, they opened 390 cases, 390 cases. And they have only received convictions for 5 cases. And the majority of those cases, if not all, and you can check me on this, if not all, were Republicans. So this is what they're doing in Texas now. We should all be appalled. We should all be outraged. We should all be, especially the folks in Texas, you should be taking to the streets. And now LULAC has already filed a complaint with the DOJ and asking for an investigation into what is happening in Texas. But let me tell you this. What happens with one will happen with others. How they are trying to intimidate this community, we cannot turn our backs on, because we will be next. Every group that are groups of people of color, you will be next. Whether we're talking Texas, we're talking Georgia, Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, you will be next. So we cannot just say, oh, this is that group of people, and I'm not going to worry about that because it's not in my backyard. It's not my home. It's not my community. It is. It is. We are one. We are one, and we're all connected. And making an imposition and intimidating one group will spill over to another group. So we should all be talking about this. We should all be outraged. And I'm shocked. I don't understand why all people in Texas have not taken to the streets. Because the more we show up for each other, the more we show up and stand up for each other, the more it shows them we will not be intimidated. And when you come for one, you're come for all of us. And they can't defeat all of us. They cannot win against all of us. So that's why it's so important for us to come together collectively to fight these types of voter suppression and voter intimidation. Okay? Moving on. This week, just in 1 week, just in 1 day, 1 or 2 days, 45 said that he would actually vote for an expansion. So he votes in the state of Florida, right? He would vote for an expansion of the 6-week abortion ban in Florida. That goes completely and totally against what is written in Project 2025, what the Heritage Foundation wants to see him impose, what the white Christian nationalists that back him want, goes completely against that. So he made that statement. He also made the statement that he was going to, if elected, he was going to impose or make sure that the government pays for IVF for families. And if not the government, he was going to force insurance companies to do so. Can I just say that this is just like the government and Mexico are going to pay for IVF just like, the government and insurance companies are going to pay for IVF just like Mexico paid for that partition, that partition, that few miles of a wall. You do remember when he said he was going to get Mexico to pay for the wall that was never finished, and Mexico did not pay a dime. So, and then and then his partner, his running mate, in front of union workers, said that he and 45 support unions. Again, going completely against what Project 2025 outlines in chapter 18. Completely against what the Heritage Foundation wants, completely against what white Christian nationalists want, and everybody that's a part of Project 2025. But they literally stood behind podiums and did interviews and said these things. And guess what? They're already backtracking everything that they said. This is who you're voting for, people. They can't make up their minds what they even stand for, even though it's in writing in a 900+ page plan, and then condensed into Agenda 47. They can't even decide what they stand for, what they represent. But this is who you want to vote for, MAGA people. These are your people. Okay. Also this week, Kamala Harris gave her first sit-down interview along with Tim Walz, gave her first sit-down interview that people had been clamoring for some reason with Dana Bash from CNN. Here are my thoughts. My thoughts are she did no harm. They did no harm, they did no damage. I don't think that Dana was necessarily asking hardball questions either. She did press on a couple of things, but for the most part, she did no harm to her campaign. We did learn, or at least I learned, a couple of things. I learned where she stands on fracking right now in this moment. I learned why she's changed her position on fracking. As a progressive, am I totally okay with that? No. Um, I learned that she's open to having a Republican on her cabinet. I was surprised to hear her say that, but then also not so surprised because pretty much every president has crossed the line and had someone from the opposite party on their cabinet. You want different voices at the table. You want different opinions, different backgrounds. You want that at the table. So I was surprised to hear it, but then not necessarily so surprised. And then her digging in on the Israel situation. And I've already explained how I feel about this. Two things I'm going to just reiterate here. I believe and I hope that her stance and the way she communicates about what's happening in Gaza evolves and changes once she gets in office. And I also believe that she's the only one out of the two candidates that will actually do something. If any change will be made out of the two candidates, I believe that the one that we can continue to push to do something and might see some movement is going to be Kamala Harris. Again, 45 has already said, finish the job and do it quickly. So those were my key takeaways from the interview. Also, I want to just make sure that people keep in mind that this first kind of softball interview, in my opinion, there's still, this is, somebody mentioned that, she had to have Tim Walz on as a crutch. Kamala Harris doesn't need a crutch. She doesn't need anybody to be there to hold her hand. Matter of fact, I would venture to say most Black women don't need anybody there to hold our hands when we're speaking about anything, because we're already overly prepared for pretty much everything that we aspire to do. So that was like, what? But, I believe that it was set up in this way because there are a lot of people that still need to get to know Kamala Harris, and there are definitely a lot of people, including myself, that need to get to know Tim Walz. So why not do the interview together? And again, every single president or president hopeful or candidate in the past has done at least one interview jointly with their running mate. Now, maybe 45 and Vance don't like each other. Maybe they don't want to be in the same room with each other. I don't know. And if they did a joint interview together, I must have missed it. But that's typically how it's routinely done. But this whole thing about her needing a crutch, that's a bunch of bullshit. She doesn't need a crutch. Most Black women don't need a crutch. I'd say most women in general don't need a crutch, because we know we have to go over and beyond and be overly prepared whenever an opportunity presents itself. So we're ready. We're ready. Just like Kamala Harris is ready. She's ready. I'm glad that she didn't, take the bait on the whole addressing 45, talking about her becoming Black overnight. Like, why are you asking me that question? Why are you asking me to address that nonsense? If I had a dollar, a nickel, a dime, for every time someone asked me when I was growing up into adulthood, what are you? I'd be a wealthy person right now. And years ago, I stopped explaining it. At some point around high school or so, I decided I was just going to tell people human. I would just say I'm human. I'm a human. I'm human just like you. And then at some point, early adulthood, I said, I'm not even responding to that question. And no, you cannot touch my hair. So the notion that it's better for her not to respond. It's a redundant, boring, simple, no thought question. And the fact that he's using this boring, just there's no thought into the strategy, no thought into the strategy. Obviously you cannot take her down by talking about her appearance, by these little personal jabs that people try to make to her laugh, the way she looks. It's just a bunch of nothingness. It's a bunch of nothingness. So I'm glad that she didn't even bother with that question. And she said, next question, like, let's move on. Let's move on, because you're not going to get anything out of me with that. So yeah, that's what I thought about the interview. I think getting in front of the people, I think continuing to move the momentum and keeping the energy up amongst the people that are on the ground, that are going to do the work and have the conversations and get people registered to vote, drive people to the polls, convince their family members, by providing the proof and the receipts of what she's done. I think that's the important work. Now, yes, you can reach the masses through media. You can reach the masses through media, but when you have that one-on-one connection with people, there's nothing like it. There is nothing like it. Why do you think 45 stays at a rally? Why do you think he stays in front of the people? This is the art of persuasion 101. You reach less people by mail than any type of communication. You reach a little bit more through television and interviews. You reach even more when you're in front of folks. But when you're doing that one-on-one conversation with people, when you do work in those small venues and having those conversations, when people can shake your hand and talk to you one-on-one, get the selfies, and have however brief that conversation might be, you're working with how you made them feel. And how you make a person feel, that's what lasts. That's what people remember. And that's why she's going to get elected.